Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. We are coming back with you rapid fire with a session to episode 10 of the Sunderhearth project. I'm very distracted. Steve's face is.
It's the only one I have.
No, part of it's like CGing out and like green
Yeah,
screening.
I noticed that earlier too. It's really strange right there, and I wonder what it is. It might be chroma cam. Let me
I don't know. That's interesting. So that kind of threw me off. Hang on. Session 10, Episode 10, Sunderhearth Project. Yeah, this is live and improvised in case you hadn't noticed. There's no plan whatsoever other than the topic that we're going to be discussing this evening, which is going to be the micro history. I think it was actually just a week ago we discussed the macro history with Keel Adam. So I'm excited to be diving back in to Sunderhearth already. It's so close to being wrapped up, and I'm excited. So before we get into that, very excited to welcome our guest this evening, Lloyd. Thank you for being here, and yeah, I guess I'm going to pass it over to Steve so that he can add anything on that he wants, and then you can plug whatever you'd like and introduce yourself, etc. And then we'll get started here. So,
Yeah,
Steve, what you got?
nothing to plug. Because it's only been a week and it takes me longer not to come up with sentences. I'm glad to be here. Glad to tackle this. Last week was a really good session, and to sort of build on that momentum, as it were. Other than that, I got a whole lot of nothing except for this is 10 out of 12, right? So it's getting close. It's getting close. So interested to see how it wraps up. But that's all I got for now.
Absolutely, and it's nice too because we've got a lot of established broad stroke type stuff done, and now we're kind of really starting to be able to get to the nitty gritty, um, like specific details, and that's the kind of stuff where it just makes my imagination at least just start rapid fire, come up with ideas, and try to connect all of these things. So I'm excited to start down that trail. So yeah, like I said, Lloyd, welcome onto the show. Please introduce yourself, tell the people who you are, where they can find you, etc.
Yeah, I'm Lloyd. I run the channel Jarl DM on YouTube, and that's where you can find all the games that I run. There's a Middle Earth game and Game of Thrones, a lot of those. That's my usual thing. So I'm glad to be doing this micro history. I'm bad at macro history, so I'm glad I'm not there for that one. But this, I think, maybe you chose me on purpose or something, but this is the sort of stuff that I do like a lot. Is figuring out specific logical increments of what's happened recently and how it affects now, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something that is a strong suit of yours that I've seen firsthand, um, and I think there's going to be a lot of really good stuff that comes out of tonight. So I'm excited to have you. Okay, where do we begin? In the beginning. So we're really kind of looking at not hyper focused necessarily, but definitely focused on like the last 125 years, give or take. I believe, like kind of from the point that the sundering took place, kind of what has happened since then. Do you have any jumping off points?
All right. So to sort of tee up some ideas, we have quite a few factions that yes or online chat has dropped on us. So we could look at some of the things that maybe concern them. We've been pretty focused on the Hearth Wardens. So maybe a couple of key events about them. Um, Maybe one of the things I'd like to figure out is when exactly, like how recently was the turning point that the Hearth Wardens were not such the glamorous thing inside of Sunderhearth that the younger generation was like, nah, dog, we want to leave, not defend this place, because that's happened relatively recently, and that sort of empowered the Dowsers. So we look at the Hearth Wardens in that instance. The Dowsers would be something interesting to figure out, like how long have they really been around? Maybe establishing something about them. You have the cult of the Shattered God. We know they exist, but we don't know anything about them, whether or not they've actually managed to regain any of the pieces of him, her, it, yet. Um, Other than that, the only things that really spring to mind is trying to figure out sort of the politics of the Council of Martyrs. We know there's a betrayer in there, sort of our Cardinal Richelieu, who is sitting in there, and we know that he is either working with or is pulling the strings of the outside, the outside Thunder King, as far as manipulating him into this war and opening Sunderhearth. So we know Sunder. Let's start there. We know Sunder was 125 years ago. So let's get some broad timeline dropped in. How long after the Sundering, or how prior to now? The very first thing that happened to sort of breached it was the building of that moat that allowed them to bring in supplies from the outside. It really sort of was the incremental opening of Sunderhearth. It's really where the Dousters started coming in, and it's probably where the first black market mana kernels and stuff were being snuck back out. That's probably the beginning of all of that, versus the full-fledged opening that we're dealing with now, although it's still, highly controlled. So how long ago do we think that was? Like how long has the world really sort of gotten a glimpse into Sunderhearth, or Sunderhearth out of?
So one of the things that we had kind of talked about was this cycle of 100 years, whenever these gods would trade positions of power, essentially. They would hand over the crown. So I definitely think that the 100 years point is about when things started to change. Everybody was kind of anticipating this cycle to elapse and then for there to be another coronation, possibly. But it didn't happen. And now that it hasn't happened, I think things have kind of started to divert from the usual cyclical return. So I think that's probably when I just completely froze on their name.
The moat in the canal were... Yeah, okay.
When the Hearth Wardens started opening up the barrier and letting people come back and forth a lot more.
So within the last 25 years?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm
thinking. I would say that if the intent is to run, and it is, right, to run a game here, or several games here, like, set the game in the most interesting time period, which is what we're getting to, right? But also the events that we talk about today, I think, have to like either have like a direct impact or culminate around the time you're running the game, right? Because 200 years ago this thing happened is mostly irrelevant to the players, unless they're like an elf or something and they lived through it. But even then it's like still just history that they lived through. So all of this, I think the micro history has to have a direct impact in how the game works. It's like a bit more practical in terms of world building, I think, than the usual sort of, and the world was made by gods, and like it's actually okay, but this is the lord of this place now, and here are his personality traits, and whatever, that sort of stuff. So if we're talking about these wardens or dousers and things like that, then you want to specifically look at how it's going to affect the players, I think, day to day as they go.
Yeah, we mentioned something similar on the last episode with Keel about making sure that everything we were doing kind of built and shaped directly kind of the scope of what we were looking at for running games and having people run games in Sunderhearth. And I think that's probably even more true for this particular episode. Sorry for the dogs.
So then at that point, I mean, I get that's very good advice. I think you could even then hyper focus and go down to, okay, so it's been about 25 years since the moat was established a little bit prior to that, but in the last 25 years at some point that's really when people started coming in and out. So if we say, okay, 25 years ago was like the first crossing, and in the last 10 years it's become a bit more commonplace, like to the point that adventurers can kind of buy their way in if they really want to, or are being sent by kings or dukes or whatever in. So then if we just look at what's happened since the point of adventurers coming into Sunderhearth, so the last 10 years of it, really what's been the big upsets or moments in the last 10 years or even 15 years, because then that gives you enough to include it in your character's backstory and have it inform the character's reasoning, but not so far that you're asking a player to read a history book in order to play.
Yeah, you want to avoid that whenever possible. Is giving players like, here's a big thing you have to read. You never want to do that, right? So
Looking at you, Forgotten Realms.
yeah, and unfortunately, like a huge amount of settings do that. What's the moat?
So one of the things that happened when the Sunderhearth deal went off is when they closed it, they put up a barrier that actually goes as far up as is humanly obtainable and under the ground. So it cut off a lot of natural resources. And so what they had done was they extended the moat for the castle into a river that sits outside of Sunderhearth to allow fresh water to come into Sunderhearth proper. And basically a large canal was dug through chunks of Sunderhearth and then eventually off into what used to be the ocean, which is now a salt desert. So there's a waterfall at the end of it. But by doing that, that was the sort of first breach of the barrier. And so they were barging in, iron and things, because one of the things that we know about Sunderhearth is that they basically rebuild and reuse rather than create new because resources are so scarce. But that would have been like that first moment that things were opened up, and that, historically would have been the ringing of the dinner bell for the black market and stuff. But more recently, we've gotten into the trade of there's enough bigwigs that are saying, hey, I want these people to go in. There's enough influence in the Council of Martyrs that even the Hearth Wardens on the inside have had to bend to that. And so you have tent cities on the outside of it of people waiting to get in and people who are supplying people waiting to get in. And, sometime the last 25 years is when that changed, and everyone basically a certain pass could come in and go, and that becomes the impetus for the adventure. So you're not necessarily stuck inside of Sunderhearth. You can explore the outside of it as well and the implications thereof.
So then I guess, like, how long ago was that they got through? Is that the decision that we have to make?
Yeah, so we know it's sometime in the last 25 years because because it would have been after the 100-year cycle, and they knew that the gods weren't changing leadership.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, they were like, well, since nothing's going to change, now we have to make sure that it's sustainable inside.
So it sort of makes brings to mind like a Wild West, like Frontier. Like, it's more magical, but it definitely feels that way, right? Like, so people are going there because they have an opportunity maybe to do something. Do you think if it was 20 years ago, there's definitely towns and stuff in there now, but if it was like 2 years ago, there probably isn't, or not much.
Right.
So that's one of the decisions. I guess it's a question of like, what's more interesting? Is it interesting if there's a couple of weird towns and like farmers living in the weirdness of inside there and like growing weird ass crops and whatever else? Or
so
there were better if it's unexplored,
Well, there were survivors of the explosion that remained inside of Sunderhearth that were more or less willingly cut off from the rest of the world. So there's always been a population inside of it. They've just been estranged from the rest of the world for the last 100 years. And only in the last 25 years have they sort of been reintroduced. But because of that, there's been a weird split. The people inside are exposed to magic. The outside world's not. So you have technology on the outside. You have not necessarily reliance on magic on the inside because they're hesitant to use it because of what happened. But magic is possible on the inside. And so people coming to Sunderhearth aren't necessarily those frontiersmen who are like, I'm going to go, stake a land claim with my mule. They're going, there has to be some sort of rich and valuable stuff in here still that can be exploited because magic items taken out of Sunderhearth will work outside for a period of time. And so that becomes a big drive is to get that stuff out. Or the mana kernels, which are essentially the soul or internal organs, depending how you want to look at it, of people who were near the explosion, can be used to recharge magic.
So has an industry sprung up of like people who are taking magic from those things and using it? Or because that would, like, if I was, so I always kind of try and put myself in the position of like someone who's very powerful and has means, and how I can exploit this thing. And if it's the magic fades eventually when it comes outside, but it's really powerful, I'm getting every person who knows anything about it, and I'm setting up like a school or like a factory or something to extract as much stuff as I can, you know?
So that's kind of the tipping point that we're on is I think up until we make decisions contrary from what we discussed, it's basically been being smuggled out. So there are some rich merchants, there are some powerful individuals who have been doing this. There, in fact, are even some magic users who have left Sunderhearth and have gone on to be important people outside because they can do magic, but they lose their magic and ability to cast spells over time also. So they have to return or they have to be recharged. So once, I think the mana kernels is a very recent thing, probably in the last 15 years that someone finally put 2 and 2 together and realized that that's how you recharge it. And so the market for it is still very underground because everyone on the outside of it has a huge fear of magic, except for those people who want to exploit it. So, sometime in the last 10 years, probably.
If I'm like a lord or a king or something, then, I've got people who are telling me they're taking all this magic out and we're not making anything from it. We're not taxing it. We're not, like, nothing's coming of it. They're just illegally trading this powerful thing. So then I get my forces, whatever they are, and I go and take it, or like at least control it or something, That's just what I would think would be like a logical. That's why I always try and do this, like micro history is like logical increments, like think about what's the most obvious thing, because that's often what happens. And I think like people in power are not going to let weird magical trade go on without them getting their hands in it. So we could be at a point where maybe this is the big thing at the moment, where like the noble houses or the king or something has decided, made a decree, like I'm sending in the boys, whoever they are, and we're taking control of the trade or whatever. We're dominating it or something,
Yeah, I like that. I think maybe even have it be where a significant contingency has already been sent and they never came back. Like they were obliterated. It serves as somewhat of a cautionary tale, kind of illustrating the danger of Sunderhearth, the center part of it, so that you have that to kind of fall back on for making the players fearful of going.
So that becomes a very interesting adventure impetus then. So the king who's in charge of Sunderhearth proper, the outside, is a split of the guy who's on the inside. When the Sundering happened, he was ripped in two. And it is the sort of good twin, evil twin type of deal, and the evil twin's on the outside. I think it's very possible that when he found out about these mana kernels, that he did send a large contingent in, and they were basically decimated. Like he forced his hand, right? He was like, "Look, I'm king. This is going to happen." He played on his brother, who's a bit dumber than he is inside, or at least a little less politically agile.
Yeah, naive maybe.
Yeah, and I think when they didn't come back out, but there's that frustration, right? You're a king going, I sent an army in, how come they couldn't get it? But these smugglers are doing the same thing, like, and they're succeeding. And so now the crown on the outside, along with our Cardinal Richelieu and the Council of Martyrs, are using adventurers and other smaller groups that are less attached to the crown to go and do this, because it's plausible deniability, plus there's no loss to them if they don't come back. But if they do, they just mint more gold. Like, who cares?
So you have degrees of separation where there's like a secret branch of like the kingdom that's doing the magic harvesting or something. Yeah. I guess it's a cool setup to have a place that is the only place that magic exists. You kind of have to go there to get the stuff. So, but then it's a question of like, if, the players could be from various different factions going in. And I think like they could be sent as king's people to like go and crack down on whatever this thing that's happening is, or like find out how the adventurers are doing it, and like duplicate it and find out exactly how they're doing it and getting away with it.
Right. And that's interesting because the politics on the outside don't allow for, because it was a sort of a near world agreement to seal this off and to never reopen it. And obviously that's sort of gone by the wayside at this point. But the politics that we've established, I think the Outside King would have a huge war on his hands were he to openly admit that he's pulling magical items out for the use of his kingdom. And so I think there's a good chance that you even have those groups that are going in there thinking that they are explorers and they're supposed to map it and they're supposed to reunite the kingdom, when in reality, half of them are being paid by the crown to go in there and take magic items out regardless of the cost, right? So there's this almost like Doctors Without Borders, but in reality they're kidnapping people. Only in this case it's magic items. So it looks humanitarian, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have, if you go with that idea, then you even have some Hearth Wardens who have figured out that these are not all good people coming in. And so that becomes a point of conflict also. But
so maybe recently, the Hearth Wardens have started to put like an embargo on how much can exit the Sunderhearth at a time.
I definitely. I also think I think maybe like an interesting thing is to currently have a standoff between the Hearth Wardens and the Crown for the first time in history.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they can kind of lay claim to being able to do it because the king on the inside is siding with them. But
right.
His ability to have power is subject to what's inside that bubble, versus his twins is not. And so you're at that point where they're denying as much as they can, but they also can't afford, the Hearth Wardens themselves can't afford an open conflict. There's only like 15 of them at a time. So it's that weird balancing game.
And like Lloyd mentioned earlier about setting it during the most interesting time, like you're putting it right on the precipice of like a powder keg that's about to ignite. That's a great place to start playing in a setting because it gives you the freedom to take that powder keg explosion in whatever direction you want, and it just kind of sets it, primes it, lights the fuse, and then hands it to you, and you get to do whatever you want with it. But there's no shortage of ideas that are going to probably happen when it goes off. So there's no like stymieing for ideas or what you want to do with it. There's going to be an abundance of things you could do. So I think that's a great idea.
I do too. The whole idea is great because we know that we had talked about in that tent city on the outside that there are religious pilgrims that are hoping to get inside because inside they can talk to their gods, or at least that's their thinking. And that idea of the pilgrims kind of are the ones who have a little easier chance of getting in and getting out, because if not, you're literally risking pissing off a god who still has potentially magical ability inside of Sunderhearth, not to mention the politics that fall in line with it. And so they are kind of the ones that have the free pass to come and go, and that gives you an easy entry point for the more corrupt individuals to tag into the pilgrims or these supply runs or humanitarian aid.
Is it like known that like are the clerics in this setting like divine magic?
There's divine magic inside of Sunderhearth. On the outside of it, they've turned to medicine, and there is a false god out there. There's a church on the outside that is completely bogus. It's basically a face who has gotten himself a couple of magic items out of Sunderhearth so he can do miracles.
Right. Okay.
And he's funneling all that money into himself.
So then, if there's like actual magic inside the place, like divine magic, there'd be real miracles and actual healing and things like that. And so I think there'd be definitely like a petitioner city outside or a town. Like I think you mentioned a tent city or something like that. There'd be so many people out there waiting to get in. And if you're enterprising in any sort of way, you are charging them. So I think it might make sense that the fake one, has like taken control of the petitioner city and charges them whatever indulgences or whatever to let them into the real place. And they say that it's their god, or like something like that. Like, okay, yeah, you can come in. It's our god, and and we'll let you in, but you have to pay us this amount to look upon the face of God and feel their presence or whatever, because I imagine if you're a religious person or you can cast divine spells, when you cross the border, you literally suddenly feel a torrent of like power, magical, and that would be a transformative experience for most people, I think.
And that's one of the interesting things that I think Jeremy created with this magic. So magic happens in Sunderhearth because of essentially the radiation of the magic that went off. There are no gods granting spells. So when you walk in believing that you're a cleric and that your god's going to give you the ability to heal, you can. It doesn't change the function of the classes or anything like that. It's the role play aspect of it.
Sure.
But in your mind, it's still your god. But the church, the one on the outside, has sort of figured this out. Like they know the gods aren't playing favorites on the inside, and that gives them more machinating ability. So that's really good. All right, so we know the Dowsers have really set up a black market entry exit. So the main way to get into Sunderhearth is actually through the main gate of the castle, because that's where the bubble is sat. But Dowsers can go to any of there's towns that sort of ring the bubble, and there's a flame in each one of these towns that's part of what keeps the magic of the ward working. Well, Dowsers have the ability to deactivate that ward and let people in and out. So that's become another huge source of influx. So there, the population in Sunderhearth, contrary to what people want to happen, is currently growing. There's probably more people going in looking for treasure and magic than there are leaving. All right. So if we're putting the opening of Sunderhearth, like the political opening, about 15 years ago, just so I have it on a timeline, how long ago did this outside church get a hold of these relics, the ability to cast magic on the outside, and set up this, sort of indulgence system because it's this beautiful idea that you have this tent city full of people who want to get in, and then you have this one like temple that's been built there, and it's pristine, but they still won't heal you in that temple. You have to pay to cross to the other side. So it's this huge chamois front.
Yep.
But how long have they been active like that?
So
I guess like maybe. So you go.
Okay. The first place my mind goes is probably almost immediately. So, like, one of the things that we were pushing pretty hard is that items from inside Sunderhearth had this kind of half-life of magic.
Right.
That once they're taken out, they start to diminish and diminish and diminish. But I think that this church formed very quickly, shortly after the Sundering and the wall was created, because the priests who ended up getting shut out would have already been used to the knowledge and understanding that faith is one of the easiest ways to get people to go along with your society and your laws, and it's one of the easiest ways to control them. And I think that these surviving priests who got shut out ended up with some kind of magical artifacts that happened at the Sundering. So the radiation, the power that's stored within these items is so significant that even 125 years later, it's still leaching magic out of it. And so, like, these become like the robes of saints in Catholicism, or like
right, the finger bones of St. Peter.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
So it's literally somebody's robes that they were wearing at the Sundering.
So does that mean that there's been magical healing outside of Sunderhearth for 125 years then?
I think ish.
It could
but it's
be,
like,
but it would be very rare, right? You have
right.
Yeah, like one guy has an item that has X amount of charges that recharge every day for 100 years, and they have whatever, like a headband of healing or something. I think like it makes sense that one enterprising, clever liar could have like gotten a hold of like 2 or 3 magical items, one that can make light, one that can heal, one that can project the voice, one that can make you hover or whatever, all these things, that would be insane to see if you were watching them actually. And you could, like, this one person could easily create a church around himself. Like, okay, the god is dead or has been smashed, but there is a new faith and I'm its head. Look at all these things that I can do. I think you had mentioned something like this has happened, but that person then quickly, if they are a fraud, works really, really hard to hide the fact that they're a fraud. Like, gathers other people to them who are faithful, gathers more people to them who are not faithful, but also good liars and want to get rich, and then they sort of perpetuate the idea, I guess,
So 125 years ago, some of the clerics who make it out, I mean, they could actually even be clerics of the god of lies, the goddess of lies, right? And so that becomes part of her whole shtick, is setting up this church on the outside, because she doesn't care how she gets worshipped. It's all a lie. So it, aggrandizes her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very interesting if they do have a couple of these artifacts that are kind of, maybe they're starting to fizzle out, and that's part of their impetus also for getting new items from the inside out. All right, cool.
So then I like the idea that there's a temple that's built at the entrance, one of the entrances, and it spans the border. So half of it is in the outside and half is in the outside. And you got to pay to get into the other half of the temple, and that's when they can heal you because they're in the magic bit,
That's really interesting.
It might imply like, oh, look, we have magic outside, and clearly this is a real faith. But it's technically like within the border, or like it's close enough that you can leech enough magic to do the healing.
Right. I mean, they can literally go get a wand of cure wounds and then just keep passing it back inside to recharge or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
But also, what a politically strong move to be able to build it and then demand that an entrance be put in their temple, because that means that a hearth has to be dropped there.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, like, that politically made the religion real also, right? Because now literally the Council of Martyrs, the Hearth Wardens, the kings are saying, yes, like, we're going to let them do this. That legitimizes this whole sham religion.
I think you could have a connection with this person who runs the fake religion, who's not really a cleric, and the bad king, the
definitely
half of the king, that they are like definitely in cahoots, that there's like a connection between them where the king probably knows that it's fake, but he understands the power of faith, and like they work together in that. And so you've got the king saying as well, like, granting legitimacy to these people, and then the church is granting legitimacy to the king, which is how it's always been, I guess.
Yep. And I like the idea too that each of these hearth fires that kind of ring the entirety of what constitutes Sunderhearth, that each one of them was at like a specific point. Like, there had to be something there already before the towns were built up around it and stuff like that. So they were at, outposts and, small towns that had, a keep or an abbey.
And that's one of the things that we said we weren't going to necessarily define, was what each of these were.
Exactly.
But to say that they had to have when you're creating it for your game, there should have been a predecessor point there, whether it was a fort or a small town or an abbey or, some sort of, like Kevin said, like a ley line, however it worked out, like something was there prior to. All right, awesome.
So you've got a petitioner city. I think that's really interesting, and they would have to, players potentially have to pass through that to get in. That would be an experience for sure, and really a fun and interesting way to like provide them with world information without being like, and in the year 1143 there was a thing where a thing exploded, and like, no, they're walking through it and they can see it,
right.
And but then there has to be other stuff once they get through, I guess.
So when the dome is dropped, it literally splits a city in half right through the castle. So half the castle is in, half the castle is out, thus the Sundered King. So you have that city, which has now grown into a much larger city on the inside of Sunderhearth, because for a while it was the main point of population. There were other outposts and small towns that were inside of it, but they weren't anything large, and probably to this day, 125 years later, are not large. Like, you don't survive in a setting like this by creating lots of babies. Like, it doesn't work. They just get eaten by monsters or tomato plants or whatever happens. So once you're there, like, you have that, then you kind of hit, mutant farmland, until you get deep enough in that you're getting closer to the epicenter, and things get more chaotic and crazy as you go in. You start running into fractured parts of the goddess of magic as well. You start running into like these hideouts of the cults. There's 2 cults for the god, one of his id and one of his ego, that are running around out there. But otherwise, stuff's kind of amorphous. The only other thing we know is that at the dead center, you go from all this chaos to emptiness until you hit this plateau, which is where the coronation for the changing of gods normally happens. And that hill has sort of become sentient, because it is witnessed. And actually, that ties back to what we talked about originally. We were trying to figure out why this hill would be so important. Well, if it's where the gods get coronated, that hill is pretty important, and it makes sense now that it is sentient now, but has observed everything since the beginning of time.
Right. There's so much latent magic there that it makes sense.
I
would think the people who live in the mutant farmland, that's within the Sunderhearth, right? Like all these.
Yeah, just on the outside of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like once you get in, those people are interesting, I think, and there has to be something happening in there. Like, who's running it in there? Is anybody running it? Like, are they like separate little farmhouses here and there, or are they villages, or are they towns, or is there like some sort of who's in charge and who's getting the money from it?
So I think what we had talked about was there are towns and our villages, and then you have a couple of hardcore go-it-yourselfers who maybe it's 2 or 3 families that have banded together to do this and are sort of self-sustaining. But each village sort of is bringing their stuff back to the inside portion of Sunderhearth to sell at that market for those people who aren't farmers and so on and so forth. And there is a system of taxation and mercantilism that happens on the inside to try and sustain it, because you don't go to a armor smith and say, hey, I need a new set of armor. You go to an armor smith and say, hey, this is my grandpappy's armor. Can you patch it with these horseshoes? Right. But it is interesting to sort of look at the interior bits, and once you get sort of away from that immediate influence of Sunderhearth, like who does become in charge of that, and who's the important people there.
Yeah. You mentioned that, like, if there's a lot of I don't know what the races or the ancestries or whatever are in the setting. You said that there was like mutant farmlands and stuff. Is there some idea that maybe if you live there a long time, the radiation of the magic gets into you?
Yeah. So one of the things that is setting specific is the more magic you cast, the more chance you have essentially of developing, you might have cat eyes or to grow a tail or scales or something like that. Or you get the same thing from essentially exploring too deep into it if you don't get eaten. And people who tend to look like that become outcasts even in Sunderhearth, because the old stodgy people in Sunderhearth think that magic's still bad. And if you're using it so much that it's corrupting you and changing you, then clearly you can't be trusted. So there becomes that sort of segregation that happens.
I wonder if there would be a movement within of like the new people, a much better title than that, but like some idea that like, okay, we live within this place and we are changed by it, and that is important. Like, that's meaningful, and we identify as this now. We're not the people who live outside, who are blind to magic and faith and these things, and who rely on whatever bits of machinery. We're in here and we're part of it and we feel it. And so, I don't know, the Sundered or something, like they live within and would band together maybe and create some new identity. That could happen in 20 years easily, I think,
Yeah, for sure. Especially since those are the kinds of people that tend to wield the most powerful magic.
Right.
Because, they are inundated with it. They are, saturated in it. So they have the capability of casting spells that a lot of other people, even in Sunderhearth, wouldn't have the capability of doing. So them forming even a loose knit. I almost like the way that the mages are depicted in the Witcher universe, where it's like this series of individuals. They only get together every once in a while, and when they do, it's really important. They have this moot, once a millennia or whatever, and they're all long-lived, and they all specialize in like these different
Right.
arenas of magic. I kind of like that.
So that becomes interesting. So we're talking about who's in charge. If once you get outside the immediate influence where people are practicing magic a bit more, then it makes sense that whoever the most practiced spellcaster is becomes the one in charge, right? Because I mean, might makes right. And in turn, they probably would protect those who are similarly changed around them. And if we know anything about adventurers, when they come through and they run to a village full of people who have, rat tails and alligator scales, they're going to put them to the sword much faster than ask questions. That's what adventurers do. And so that just kind of goes to prove the point of the outside will never trust us. Like, we've become acclimated here. We've embraced this. This is our land now. Like, maybe they don't even view themselves as part of the kingdom that before it was Sunderhearth.
Right.
Like, no, like you guys abandoned us. You locked us in here.
There's also an idea that they could see themselves as the next thing, like the next level of person, like they've achieved another level of personhood. And it's clear that by the gifts that they've gotten, it's also worth thinking about like that, like if there are very few wizards, every wizard's like a god,
just about.
Basically, like magic is so unbelievably powerful and world breaking if you think about it for 5 minutes, and I know it's a fantasy setting, so you can't go too far in that direction, but like it's worth considering that like one druid with Goodberry can feed a village, or like
right.
one wizard with Fabricate can turn trees into houses in 6 seconds, like those kind of things are huge and have massive implications for the inside of this place. And so like it might be really hard to live in here, but it might be easier in some ways because you have access to magic that the outside could never dream of,
And that sort of is a crux of it, I believe. Good, Jeremy?
I was just going to say, so what if, like, these incredibly powerful wizards, they're not the only ones who can cast magic, but they're the ones who have excelled at doing so. They've excelled at controlling it as best they can.
They're the bravest ones because they're still willing to try.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And push themselves. So what if they are put in charge of the towns that have grown up around each of these nodes around the barrier? So like this official council of wizards are the mayors or governors or whatever you call them.
So I kind of like leaving the wizards more internal because that's where more magic happens and they're more embracing it. And the de facto leadership of the sort of ring villages are your village elder or whatever Hearth Warden happens to be present, because he would immediately outrank the village elder. And then eventually it would go back to being the king. But that does give you this really interesting, like, at odds system, where a village has, and we talked about it before, where a village is sort of siding with the Dowsers more than the Hearth Wardens because the Hearth Wardens can't come around as often anymore. Right? But there's things that go bump in the night. So if the Dowsers step in and protect them, now this village sides with them. And so that village is being used to allow adventurers in without having to go through the normal process. And so the council of wizards that sort of watch over the changed on the inside see this village as a potential enemy because adventurers are coming through and going after their people now. And so that puts them at, it becomes that sort of King Arthur versus the Britons versus the Celts, like the Romans coming in type idea. Like it's old magic versus new world. Give you that juxtaposition.
So there could be this council of relatively powerful magic users, wizards and whatever else, who, if a Hearth Warden comes by once every few months, then once every few years, maybe one of these comes by to collect a tithe of some kind. Something weird and arcane that doesn't really make sense to the people. Maybe they're looking for like magically active children. Maybe they're looking for whatever,
good.
But something that the people don't really understand, but they always have ready, because if you don't, then, they stop time and then they turn your house inside out or whatever,
Right.
Well, so, one of the things that we had discussed last time was the thought of almost like the spirit of a deity when it's reborn, almost like the Dalai Lama, like it's born into a new physical body.
So
And
they come
then
by
kind of-
checking for it.
Yeah, so they're going around literally looking for this next incarnation.
So we've played so much with duality in this that, and we talked about, previously, that's how the Hearth Wardens got new wardens, right? They held these trials. People sent in their hopefuls from the villages. Some of them would be selected to be Hearth Wardens. Well, if the Council of Wizards is doing the same thing, but it's not like a selection process, you're not volunteering. We're going to come to your village every 10 years, and we're going to take a child under the age of 10, because otherwise we'd have seen them before.
Mm-hmm.
And like that becomes your tithe, which also oddly is 1 in 10. Right? And so we on the inside will protect you against the horrible things. Sure, you might run into a werewolf once in a while. That's what Hearth Wardens are for. But the really nasty stuff we'll keep contained. But that also gives them a chance to search for the new god, but also gives them a chance to go, well, this kid's gonna be really powerful. Let's pull him with us and train him up to, because somewhere, someone on the inside, whether it's an elf or a dwarf or a long-lived human, has realized that the world's going to come to blows, and if they want to maintain their status quo once Sunderhearth is open, they're going to have the ability to be able to enforce it.
If you are a person who can tap into infinity and make insane things happen, then you want to limit who else can do that.
Right.
Hugely, like if you discover one day that you can, well, I mean, every spell is insane, but like you can make fire rain from the sky, you can do that. That means other people could potentially do that. So you want to tightly control who can do that, or else you are less powerful and other people are more dangerous. So then I think it makes total sense that like those wizards in the center are like, I mean, they could be lying too, let's be real, probably are. But I think strictly policing who gets to like be trained in, and maybe magic is really difficult. That's something that we've done in other settings before, where magic, you can't just like accidentally become a wizard, you can't stumble upon the words or whatever. It's complex. It's like mathematical formulas. It's like weird shit like that is not possible to stumble upon. So the only way you can learn to be a wizard is by a proper wizard teaching you, which is a similar thing like they have in The Witcher as well, which is great. It makes total sense to me that you would control the absolute hell out of that,
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because one of the things that we had said was, people use things like mending every day without thinking about it, because it's so low level that they're not worried about the chaos that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the higher level stuff that was abandoned. And so, Sundering happened 125 years ago. So 200 years ago, there were wizards running around everywhere, right? Like every tavern had wizards ready to go off and slay dragons.
Mm-hmm.
Now that doesn't happen anymore. So the guy who can cast 3rd level spells is all of a sudden hot shit in the world, because most other people can't.
Right.
And so, yeah, Lloyd, you're 100% right. Like they would want to maintain that and keep, like they're probably 100% opposed of that barrier ever coming down. Like F you, right?
Yep.
Like let's keep magic in here.
Mm-hmm.
It may not even be the monsters that are responsible for the king's forces going missing. It might be these council of wizards who just said, nah, F this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, maybe even some of the monster stories that make their way back out are just completely made up by these guys.
Yeah.
Because they don't want you getting any closer to the center and discovering, what's potentially there. Now, we do know magic drives you crazy over time. Like there's going to be a sanity deal with it. And that just makes more sense, right? Because they just become more and more fervent in their belief.
Paranoid.
And,
yeah.
Well,
Okay,
and
awesome.
also we were talking about one of the reasons. Well, one of the reasons for that is because the more you use magic, the more you have it kind of seeped into you, and that attracts these fragments of the gods splintered in your mind. And so, yeah, the danger of going out into Sunderhearth when you are this powerful becomes exponential.
Right. Because tapping, the way that we have it set up, tapping magic was essentially opening a conduit to the god of magic and allowing magic to come through. Well, he's so broken now, it still comes through inside of here because of the radiant magic, but you're still basically asking a insane god to help you channel that. That's not going to work.
If the magic infuses you as well, maybe the wizards become the monsters. It's like an inevitability almost, like after some time or some centuries or whatever it is. and they're desperately trying to figure out a way to stop that happening. Maybe
I think
and
you
so,
definitely do. Yeah.
and so there's like we control the monsters and make sure they don't come to you. It's actually because they can see it happening and they imprison them in the hopes that they can cure them, or something like that.
No, that's brilliant, because there's a particular monster that hunts down magic use, like it's attracted to it, and it is essentially a fragment of the god. Like it basically is trying to put itself back together. Like, I want all the magic back in me. And so these guys, these grand wizards, would become beacons to that, right? Like ringing the dinner bell.
Yeah.
But to survive those things only to become something similar, because that's the nature of magic now, is kind of poetic in a sense.
Yeah, it's like a really clear, power corrupts absolutely,
right,
sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like in this case, literally and physically, but
it's also
and
kind of
metaphysically.
The idea of if you look into the abyss, it will peer back into
Right.
you, kind of thing. Unraveling the secrets of these magic, these spells. Yeah, it's going to give you a lot of power, but at the same time, you are having to pay a price for that.
Right. Your mortal brain is not equipped. Your monkey brain is not equipped to deal with universe-breaking things like that. Yeah. And that can tie into the sanity thing too. Like if you see magic happen and you can make it happen, I think you quickly lose the run of yourself. If you could make those things actually happen.
So you guys remember Underworld, the movies?
Yes.
Not that they were great, but I enjoyed them.
I love them.
So the idea that where they had like the council of the older vampires, that they would wake up in turn, having if the more you practice magic, the more rapidly you become one of these monsters. There becomes an idea that when you choose to serve on this council on the inside and protect your change, these people who are deformed now because of magic, that it's going to require more magic of you. And so you're pushing yourself further and further to the abyss, that you're going to become a monster. But if in becoming that monster, you don't lose everything you used to be. Kill just said, damn, the imagery of a gallery or prison of monstrously transformed wizards. If they literally have like an oubliette where they're keeping them because they're still useful because of their knowledge of chaos, that you have to go down and talk to a monster to be able to figure things out is, just a Tomb of Annihilation all of a sudden gets dropped right into the middle of Sunderhearth.
Is there like a break? Like your body becomes twisted and weird, but if you still maintain some parts of yourself, maybe those tithes are new vessels for the person. So my body's gone weird. I've got a crab claw and I'm 10 feet tall. This is not going to last much longer. So we need a new batch of bodies in which to inhabit or something,
So that is, dude, that's amazing. That is so beautiful, because you have these guys who are going around looking for the next vessel of the god. And we know that humans have a long time tinkered in deific magic because they're the ones that coordinate the next god. And so what they've done is they've corrupted that vessel magic to allow themselves essentially infinite life, because they can move most of them from their previous body to this new one, but that has to be a really special wizard that has that done, right? A lot of these kids, like if there's 12 villages, every 10 years you get 12 new kids. Not all 12 of them are going to become vessels for.
No.
Some of them are going to become new high wizards because they're talented. But that one cream of the crop is the one who is selected that year to allow one of the council to inhabit a new body through this horrifically magical creepiness.
I love the idea that they're going around and telling these people, we are taking these children because they're gifted and we're going to teach them the ways of magic. The next time that those parents see their child, it looks like their child. And yeah, they're really capable in magic. But
right. No, Mom, I want to stay. They're teaching me so much.
Yeah. It's literally this wizard who's done this 3 or 4 times before and is, 160 years old or whatever.
It's also kind of a cool link to like changeling or fae mythology,
right?
Where like they're literally taking your children and turning them into something else, like that's that.
Yeah, they're not replacing them, but yeah. No, that's amazing, and it's an idea that it's not even that they stay in children's bodies for long, because they have enough magic. They just magically age up the bodies to something,
to maturity.
whatever. But there is that, there's that moment where that child, this prodigy child, is marched back out through the ring towns in this celebration of how good this cult of wizards is at picking out new saviors. And he's doing this magic and this magic and that magic. And it's what reinforces the town's willingness to donate their children.
Yeah, I think the wizards have to be actively doing visible, helpful shit for the villages for this to be maintained. So it has to be the case that like every 4 years a wizard comes out and casts what is it, like plant growth, or like the super harvest one, or like they come out and in 40 minutes build a wall for the city or something, like with mud to stone, whatever. They use some spells to drastically increase how safe and how effective the village is. And then everyone remembers, 10 years ago, the wizard came out and he built us this wall in 20 minutes and then he cured me of my leprosy and whatever, like all of this happens. And it has to always be in living memory so that everyone has, at least someone's grandpa has seen one of the wizards do a miracle or like save the village or something,
Oh, that's
sort of like, so they look benevolent to the villagers, and they are maybe to some extent.
And I think that internally they are, like, it's just that in order to keep this cycle going, they had to do something.
Right. The rituals are gross and like profane and terrible, but maybe they see it as like, this is the cost we have to pay to maintain whatever.
Right. 100%.
Absolutely.
And I do think that reflects back to your earlier comment of this growing dissension politically of these individuals who find themselves their own political entity inside of Sunderhearth now.
Right.
Well, and it makes really good sense because these individuals are the ones who were willing to take it that extra step, always, so their scruples are, a little soft. They're able to justify doing this horrifying thing in order to stay in power. And it's not necessarily about just hoarding power for most of them. It's about, no, I've been doing this for so long, I'm the only one who knows how to do it. It has to be me. So,
right. It's a responsibility.
Right.
Yeah, so Cole asked, how many body transfers could one wizard survive, and do they get to be a bit off? I definitely think they do, because they're pouring 100 years worth of magical knowledge into a small child's head. It's not meant for that. So they lose part of who they were. They lose part of their knowledge. They're never going to be 100% what they were. Now, how many times can they have this happen? Probably infinitely. Like it doesn't. That's the GM's call. Like, it doesn't matter how many times it's been, how it's happened. Just that they become a little more.
They can develop weird quirks and like things like that, I guess. And you could, roll on madness tables to see what kind of insanity this wizard has.
And all of a sudden, Grand Magus was allergic to peanuts.
Right. Or like you could have people telling stories about like, well, in my great-great-grandfather's day, a wizard came here and he had this weird tick where he would like, I had a little weird tick. And then you see a wizard and he has the same thing, looks totally different, but they have the same mannerisms. Maybe they all speak in a really archaic way because they have been around for a long time, even though they look young, weird shit like that to give the impression of like, this is not the body of this person,
Right. 100%.
I also really like the idea that the majority of what they are able to transfer is their magical knowledge, their power and stuff. So a little bit of themselves, their personality and the things that exist outside of their wizardry, that's what gets left behind piecemeal. And so eventually, they just become only really powerful in magic, and who they are as a person is so scattered and fragged that it doesn't even really make sense anymore.
It's like
it'd be really like talking. Go ahead.
It's like a really long-winded way to become a lich, almost. Like you're abandoning so much of your humanity over a long time. You end up as, maybe they're not dead, but like they have very little humanity left in them. Like they don't know how to interact with people anymore. They don't know how to cook dinner or like even how to eat. Maybe they like have to be, but there's so much magical power that like actually makes you think of the navigators in Dune.
Yes.
Where they become these weird like barely human things, are very powerful and necessary, but not very likable.
So I guess to answer Cole's question, because talking about how many generations has this been happening, and it's only been 100 years. The idea being that the more powerful the wizards are, the more magic they use, the faster they degrade into these monsters, the sooner they have to get that new vessel, or they have to be put into the oubliette, until a vessel can be obtained. That entire time, as they cross closer to a monster, they gain more knowledge of chaos because they become closer to it, but they lose their knowledge of humanity. So at some point, it'd be like talking to a really high functioning autistic savant mathematician. He can explain chaos theory and granular mathematics to you, but he's not sure which fork to use or what a fork is. And that's not to disparage anyone who's autistic or savant or anything like that, but it's that separation of being so specialized that you forget what generalizations are.
Right. Has almost no practical knowledge, but has
Right.
so much theoretical knowledge of magic and that sort of thing.
And you might have one who's, if it's been 125 years, he may have done this, 10 times already, but can't recall the history for the last 100 years because that's not important to what he does. Just the magic knowledge is what's important to what he does. I mean, basically these guys become walking.
They're nukes,
They're also walking encyclopedias, right? Like when you have a question about how does a spell work, they're walking spell books. You go to them and you say, "Hey, how does a spell work?" And they can give you that information. They may also try and eat you, which is a risk you run. That's a really creepy library where it's just a bunch of monsters chained to pillars, and you have to go and ask them questions.
Right, you're not reading books; you're like interviewing this weird slavering thing.
I love the fact that it might even be called the library.
Yep.
It's like this,
or the archive or something. Yep.
Yeah. I love that.
And everyone outside thinks there's this beautiful grand library,
Right. So wait for the King to send adventurers after those books.
Yeah.
I think he's
the book that can teach me the spell of regeneration, and then they go in there and they're like, it's like.
Can you imagine, like, you've gotten to level 15 and you're going into the library and there's these monsters in this blue flickering light. They're all chained to these pillars, and then all of a sudden you just hear the tink, 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 tink of the chains coming undone. Nope. I'd like to leave now, please.
So if these particular wizards can't remember the practical side, then there must be a faction within their thing that does that job and does the day-to-day running. And maybe that's the people who aren't very powerful in magic but are still part of the organization, right? So they have what we were saying, like third level spells maybe or something.
Yep. 100%. And that works so well with, so I know you didn't get to see all the episodes of Sunderhearth so far. So within the Hearth Wardens, when they tested, only the really good ones became Hearth Wardens. The other ones would serve other functions inside the organization. They might be armor smiths or, squires essentially. And so this is that, right? Like these are, like, you're still taken from your village. Maybe you're not as good as they thought you were. And so instead you end up being a caretaker.
Right.
Like you're literally a librarian who has to go down and check on the books.
And feed them. And
make sure they get returned to the stacks.
Yep.
Because if not, they get real cranky. All right, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think as far as like who's keeping like the true history of what's happened and stuff, I think that's probably a part of the jurisdiction of the Hearth Wardens. Because again,
I think you probably have two different versions: the Hearth Wardens and then these librarian guys, the ones who are taking care of the wizards. I think they probably chronicle, because they would at least chronicle the changing of vessels, right? And so it makes it makes sense that the librarian version of history is in 10-year chunks, right? Because it was a cycle. That's really weird, because it becomes 1/10 the cycle of a deity, right? Like it becomes a human cycle every 10 years for these librarians. But yeah, the main history, the one that everyone would learn, would be whatever the Hearth Wardens had recorded and put out over the last 125 years.
And I almost picture like they probably have a written version, but a lot of it is probably handed down orally. Like, storytelling in storytelling in around the Hearth and things like that has a very nice synergy to it.
Definitely. I think that probably the only written version of it is kept in that pocket dimension with the baby fire elemental.
Yeah.
with those older wardens. They probably take the stories when the wardens come in for their cycling out, and they chronicle it there.
Yeah, there's probably like an inner circle or something who have access to the library, like the Hearth wardens aren't allowed in there or something. Like,
Oh, definitely not.
so you've got like levels of acceptance.
Clearance,
Like, of
yeah.
course, we cooperate with you in every possible way. No, you cannot enter the library. It's where sacred texts are. It's dangerous. You could hurt yourself.
Right.
But outwardly, they're extremely welcoming and they're really cooperative and whatever. And again, like, it's not necessarily an evil organization. They just have some weird evil,
right,
to
and
our minds, but it's a different world and a different morality.
I think in the recent times, maybe the Hearth Wardens are even a little more accepting of it, because some of them are starting to feel that this is our land also, that we've been protecting it for 125 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want, like, because Hearth Wardens can use magic, and they do to a certain extent. They just never push so far to become corrupted.
Yeah.
But, it's that idea of, a government using assassins. Like, you have to have people that can do the things that other people can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And so they rely on these wizards to take care of the big bads that are deep in there, because a Hearth Warden is not equipped for it, right? They probably also send the farriers, the guys who take the souls, to make sure that they actually cross over. I bet you they spend a stint with these wizards learning that magic, because we're better to learn it from than them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because one of the bad things about dying in Sunderhearth is souls don't like to cross over because of that magical barrier, so you have a lot of undead. So there's a division of cleric paladins whose job is to basically ferry souls, and
Cool.
so they would have learned that magic probably from these wizards.
Mm-hmm.
And they, although they're not a part of the Hearth Wardens and they're not part of the wizards, they are the bridging.
Right. Maybe the school of necromancy is called like the school of crossing or something in this world, because it's focused really entirely on bringing them.
That's a really beautiful term. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's awesome. So, I don't know if we've ever established it. Where are they taking these souls? Where's the deposit point for resting?
That's a good question.
Could it be this oubliette, this library, for some reason?
Like, so that the crossing of the soul becomes a physical thing rather than a metaphysical thing? It's like,
there's a setting called Spire where there's a heart at the bottom of the city, and there's so much latent magic that, like, so I think what I'm trying to say is there's so much magic in the library already, in the library, the archive or whatever, that it could go down a great many floors that don't exist. It only exists in other spaces. It could have infinite spaces in different directions that are pocket dimensions that are whatever, and so it could be massive. And so if you want to bring them there, they could like bring them there sort of in a metaphysical sense, like a magical sense, to keep the souls from wandering around and doing other shit.
I mean, I like that a lot, because instead of having to cross the river Styx and all of this, whatever it is, so that the paladin cleric duo show up, they basically, you almost have to fight the undead. Once they're succumbed, you then take something of them to deposit it into the library to make sure that it never returns as an undead, and that becomes the manifestation of their soul departing, right? Like, they're good.
Yeah.
That's
and that
pretty
could
cool.
Be like a thing of high honor, like it's a sepulcher or something, like a sacred place where the souls go, and so everyone leaves a skull or a finger bone or something, and there's like this massive wall that's 700 feet tall of bones or something, which is where everyone rests.
All right, that's awesome. So part of the ritual is taking a bone from the. I like that a lot. I also like the idea about the sort of almost infinite floors of the library going down, and so it goes from being physical to metaphysical, so that with the appropriate magical knowledge, you can walk down enough hallways in the lower floors of the library and walk right into the pocket dimension that's controlled by the Hearth Wardens, because it magically connects. Or you could walk it right up to the Sentinel of Ages, that the self-aware cliff plateau. Like, you could most anywhere that magic flows through Sunderhearth, you can get there through. And we had talked about that before too, that there were these almost like points of teleportation inside of Sunderhearth. So if they basically become sort of like veins off of the magical energy around this, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think as well, like, because there's, finite space, but there's going to be a large amount of people dying, that you need to have pocket dimensions or rooms that are bigger on the inside than the outside. So like the home of the wizards might not look enormous, but inside it's 10 times the size, and that's due to little rooms they've created, pocket dimensions, or like, I'm sure there are spells that can like create a bigger space inside than outside, modulating that sort of, so that you have these massive and on the outside it's like a wizard's tower or something, and you get inside and it's like a massive cavernous great hall, and there's rooms in all directions and stairs going up and down, and
Yeah, I really like the idea of this place, this whatever it is, the oubliette, the library, the archive, as being this, not a like vacation spot, but like a destination place. Like it is an established non node,
Right.
that exists within Sunderhearth, and it is a waypoint essentially, to traveling further in.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool.
And I think that's, it's not at the epicenter, because we know that basically the Coronation Hill and nothing are at the epicenter, but just outside of it, right? Because when you leave there, you start seeing those twisted trees that are representation of, hold on just a second. Representation of the twisted world. So just outside of those, on one end of that ring or the other is where this library oubliette has been constructed. And it doesn't matter that it's huge and crazy, because you have a bunch of powerful wizards making it, and they can build it in a few years.
Yeah.
With magic. And in fact, that may have been where some of the first wizards really crossed over into being monsters, was building this thing, because it required so much magic to pull it off.
If this is not connected, but it just popped into my brain, if we need wizards to have had many generations, they can manipulate time also. So maybe they have been researching magic in the place for hundreds or thousands of years, but only X amount of years have passed outside. If you want, if it's important that wizards have like degraded so much that you have, because I think if we're saying it's only been X amount of years, there is an argument that like, if it corrupts really quickly, it still wouldn't be enough to have gone through like many generations, I don't think, but this way, if there's time manipulation happening inside, they've already done thousands of years of research,
I love that idea. So you go into this place, and there is all of this history and context and age and wear on the interior of this place, and
right.
Time inside passes differently.
Bronze statues have turned green, like,
right,
doesn't make any sense,
yeah, that's amazing. I love that.
Right. You walk in, and there's these reliefs of the head wizard, and there's hundreds of them, and that makes no sense, because there'd have to be one every single year, but they all have these life dates that don't match up with like the time frame outside, which is why they have their own keeping of history, because it's in their time frame, not in Sunderhearth's time frame.
Right.
And so
calendar.
Right. So 125 years have passed for Sunderhearth, and 1,000, if we just go with a 10, 1,250 years have passed for these guys. I mean, talk about dedication. Like, that you're basically, you can never step out, right? The moment you do, time catches up, and you're 1,000 years old, and poof.
Yep. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, because those guys are super corrupt, or have gone through so many children to try and maintain that.
Well, and they also have elevated themselves in magic so far that they know if they step outside of this the boundaries of this protective place that things are just going to converge on them. They're going to go through leagues of travel just to find them. It's it's like a rod of it's completely and totally whatever, like the nuclear source is the core is basically just like taking one of those out and just like throwing it out the door.
So I'm not the biggest Harry Potter fan, self-admittedly, but the upper spire of this library, where some of these wizards get together to talk magic, I can just see these fragments of the god whipping around outside, trying to figure out how to get in to eat them, and it's sort of like those Dementors flying around Hogwarts type deal. And it's a constant thing. Like when you ride up to it, it looks like a storm cloud, but it's not. In fact, that's probably where those things live, is around that, trying to get in, and they only leave it when a bright enough beacon is lit somewhere else in the land for them to go, okay, easy collection.
That's a cool image too of like, I think of like Sauron's tower, like Barad-dûr, where there's a swirling cloud, but it's not a cloud. It's just like these things that are like so hungry to eat the wizards inside, and then something happens and there's like a cloud just like moves. That would be extremely freaky, especially if you see it from a distance and it's coming in your direction.
Right. The wizard in your group is just like light.
Is that cloud moving really fast?
All right, that's really good. I also love the fact that we keep calling them wizards, but we keep talking about them doing clerical magic and doing druidic magic and ostensibly bardic magic in the history keeping and so on and so forth. So like
maybe it's like magi or like
I think calling them wizards is great.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a colloquialism for anyone who can use magic. I think the idea of maybe if you only ever healed, people would refer to you as a priest or a cleric.
Mm-hmm.
But even on the inside, people who do divine magic, like if you live in Sunderhearth, you realize you're not talking to a god. Like your prayers aren't being answered in that mental capacity. Just you're able to do divine magic.
Right.
So the really devout ones still have their small temples and they still hold services, but even that's becoming a little more by the wayside inside of Sunderhearth because you don't have to.
Yeah, there could be a point where the distinction vanishes as well, where you learn enough about chaos that you realize it's all just magic.
Right.
Magic,
and I think that's exactly where
and,
these guys are. It's not that they're multi-class, it's just that they have levels in magic.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, this is really cool. My mind is just racing now. So we covered establishing this order of wizards, where they exist, and have tied it to a couple of different already existing points, like putting souls to rest, things of that nature. What else do we need to talk about? Do we need to talk about the war happening outside?
So we're talking about when we're setting the game. So these are the two big things we've talked about are there's a petitioner city outside, so the temple and stuff, and then these wizards inside. If there's another thing that's maybe not so magical, because currently what you have, like if I'm a cleric, awesome, or like a divinely sort of moved character, I've got this temple, petitioner city, there's a lot of stuff going on there, and then there's stuff about magic that happens inside that's interesting. If I'm arcane, then there's this insane wizard guild that I can look into. If I'm martial, maybe I don't have so much, or if I'm a rogue, like
right. I think the rogue's enticement becomes the dowsers, the black market, that type of stuff. Sure. So that kind of is okay. But there is the brewing war on the outside, right? The outside king of Sunderhearth is getting ready to move against this dwarven nation to the north because they've essentially discovered black powder and have tested it and proven how effective it is. And if he can't have magic, he wants black powder. In fact, he wants them both.
Yeah.
So there is that war on the horizon, and it makes sense that maybe you're the martial characters, like that faction movement is after those, the I don't know, the magical armors and stuff that exist inside the weapons. I know that falls back into Magic, but it's a fantasy setting.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
And it's probably the only thing that levels the playing field for guys who have cannons. And part of me thought was like, all right, is there some sort of, is there a group that's coming in here and going, well, if we take griffin eggs out and raise our own griffins on the outside, do we have these? And I'm like, well, that's a little Dragon Prince for me, which is a great cartoon, but I don't necessarily need to pull it into the game. But going in there after those resources to sort of be able to be on par with this kingdom is definitely a thing. But otherwise, I don't know what would.
Yeah, if we think about, so it's been 25 years, you could have military factions or military scientists who have gone in to take, I think griffin eggs are a great call, but something to help them fight better. So it could, like, a flying creature is great, and there's now regiments of Pegasus Knights or whatever, or there's who ride nightmares or who use certain animals in war, like whatever, weird dogs,
right?
Or they've like captured some animals and used those to influence the way they fight, looking for a way to stand against black powder without magic, without easy access to magic. So they need a sustainable way to do that. And so magical creature is actually a really good way to do that, I think, because they'll probably still be magical if they leave. Maybe.
They would die faster. Because one of the things like that happened when the Sundering went down, there are still some magical creatures that manage to live outside of Sunderhearth. But it's because they're so innately magic that they sustained themselves for the last 125 years, although they are also starting to wean out, minus the fact that every time Sunderhearth gets open for people to go in and out, some of that radiation leaks out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, some of these creatures are becoming more invigorated. I also think you are starting to see on the outside world, these trolls or whatever, starting to find dens and warrens closer to Sunderhearth, so that when the doors do open, they can be fed a little more regularly in the magic. So the monsters that have sort of gone far and wide to hide and survive are now also like moths to a flame, being drawn towards Sunderhearth, so that tent city on the outside, the city of petitioners, and the outside of Sunderhearth are starting to become pinched between these occasional monster raids on the outside trying to get into Sunderhearth, because they can feel it, and the things on the inside trying to get out.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it becomes a nasty place to be. But yeah, something like the griffin eggs, or because where the coronation would have happened would have had several armies out there to witness this coronation, as well as the population of a city. So there are plenty of, albeit magical, arms and armor on that battlefield to be taken, to be given to a new army. Were you able to get that far in? Because it would have been it's really the muckety mucks of the world would have shown up for this passing of the torch, as it were.
I'm trying to think, if I'm the evil king, what the quickest way to make the best force is that will be effective against dwarves. And I think dwarves are probably not as fast. They probably don't have cavalry. They probably don't have that sort of thing. So then if you have flying cavalry, great. That's a really hard counter to dwarves who are firing guns at you to some extent. But if you can't reliably get those, which maybe you can't, then there are other ways of maybe infusing some of those qualities into your soldiers. Like there's a potion they take or something that allows them to see. It's all magic-y is the issue. I mean, it could be science-y, if it's on the outside and they're working on, because I think you had mentioned they work on medicine and stuff, but I don't know how far along the idea of like alchemy and stuff is.
So alchemy is, and I was just thinking that if something elementally changed when the Sundering happened, and now it becomes Greek fire, were you to apply it appropriately. But the only source of that is internal. I don't need a wizard to be able to do that. I just need you to be able to get it out and give it to my alchemists so they can then turn this into a weapon that is at least on par with black powder.
What if there is a material?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking like you get the blood of a creature, something magical, and when you drink magic blood, it like roids you out for it's like a combat stem or something, right? Or like a witcher potion.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need a special material which will hold the magic within it until it's unstoppered or something. I don't know. Maybe it's too complicated, but like some way that you can have everybody in the army have a thing, and then it's combat time, and they go gluk 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 gluk, and they all go, you know,
gummy berry juice.
Yeah.
So we already have the mana kernels that are established.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So maybe these mana kernels, for people who aren't practitioners of magic, maybe it can be leached or whatever, or ground down, smelted, you know, something into a different format and distributed that way.
Mm-hmm.
So what if it becomes refined and is ingested, whether it's powdered or drank or whatever? And what it does is it corrupts you. It gives you those monstrous traits for however long it lasts. And so they become like those wizard monsters, right? They're super strong, they're super fast. Maybe they even have, a breath weapon or whatever the case is. And that makes them highly effective. The more you take it, the more you need to achieve the same effect next time. Also, the more corrupt you become. Corruption can't be sustained on the outside of Sunderhearth, but there's not enough magic. So eventually it would kill you. You would die a monster on the outside. Unless you got so used to it and so addicted to it that now you're taking your troops onto the inside to go get more of it because you're sustained in there. And now there's this military faction who has a blood-crazed leader who wants more of this and can sustain himself inside of Sunderhearth, but on the outside, it becomes that quick sort of super soldier serum.
Well, and I think too, it's as far as the rest of the way magic has this half-life, it's very truncated. How long it lasts, it's super temporary. And I think maybe even, like you say, the transformations and things that it grants you, the abilities that it gives you is also temporary. So you go back to being your normal self. Maybe not entirely your normal self. Maybe your arms stay longer than they were before or something.
Right.
But you more or less go back to being normal physically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the mental part of you that is slowly starting to not be as okay the more often you do this.
Right. I mean, it basically becomes mentally addicting, not necessarily physical, right? Like you need that.
There's in Rifts, Palladium Rifts, there's a class called the Juicer.
Yep.
Which is like they take a bunch of insane combat stems and then they get like a 4-year lifespan. Like something like that, right? So you could have a similar thing here where it's like, all right, you like jack yourself full of magic dust and you become just unstoppable, like big, beefy, hard to kill. Your bones fuse together, you get claws or whatever. And those are like the most elite soldiers that the evil king has. But they have a really short shelf life. And it could be a year even, in this setting. Right. And so those guys, once they become this, don't want to die. And then they want to look for a way to fix it. And then you have this similar idea where the faction is like, we have to go in there and find out how not to die.
Right. Because I think that on the outside, you have your troops. They take it once, they morph back, and maybe their fingers are a bit long, or maybe they have extra hair this time. But they go back to being normal. But there's always an itch in the back of their head that wants more of this. Then you have troops that are a little more gung ho, and so their commanding officer gives it to them more than once, and it has to be that larger dose each time until you get to a point where the bones are fusing and they are these monstrous things and they don't need the elixir anymore, but they're going to die in a matter of weeks at this point. And so at that point, the humanitarian king goes, well, send them to Sunderhearth so they can live out their time because they won't suffer in there. And the evil king is like, nah, dog, send them right to that dwarven mountain, kill as many dwarves as you can, die for your king, congratulations.
Yeah, you can tie it in with the church and king too, that it's like a sacrifice you're making for the kingdom, for the nation. Like you can get real gross propaganda out there about like, you only have one life, give it for the kingdom, you know?
Right, yeah, for the emperor.
Exactly. Totally.
Yeah.
You know, and so you can do a lot of that where it's like a big honor to like become one of these changed soldiers, you know,
Berserkers.
like, yeah. It's
Yeah,
like, you know, and they're
it's like
devastating. Like,
right. And it's got, like you said, it's got this religious, like, undertone to it. Again, like the Berserkers, where it's, you know, you are completely handing yourself over as an instrument of war, knowing that you're not going to come back, you know, but you're doing the ascension. You know, you're going through this transformation on purpose.
And you know who's really eating that up is the God of War. Because this is what he wanted, right? Because the original premise is that the God of War was getting ready to transition over to being the God of Magic. Like that was the changing of the guard there. The God of Lies, the Goddess of Lies goes to him and says, hey, you want another 100 years? And talks him into corrupting this. And then he doesn't get it because all the gods have to run away. But he's digging on this, right? Like this is a good thing for him.
right. All war and all killing in hate is like helpful to the God of War.
Right. And so, you know, maybe in the last little bit of time, because we know that in the 125 years Sunderhearth has happened, that the God of Lies or the Goddess of Lies is the only God that's actively working in the world, right? But she knows that it's not going to kill them, unlike the sort of charade that she painted for the rest of the gods. Maybe the God of War is sort of tipping his toe into it now, because you have that war between the Sunderhearth and the dwarves, and you have these berserkers. Like maybe he's tipping his toe in and going, wait a second, they're not like, no one's coming after me directly. And so he is intensifying the effects of Mana Kernel for these berserkers, right? So the high they get is not just the Mana Kernel, but it really is that divine touch of a god going, all right, boo, I got you for a little bit. Go do as much destruction as you want. And that sort of is giving him that toying sense. It also makes for this really beautiful standoff inside of Sunderhearth, where the gods feel a little more comfortable coming around. The God of War showing up to the Goddess of Lies and going, WTF, like, and now she has to convince him, don't ruin it for both of us, right? Like, you've got a big war coming, and I got my 100 years out of it. Don't worry, in 75 years when it rotates, it'll be your turn again. But you can have 75 years of war between now and then.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's.
I think you could have lots of like.
It's her saying it's technically my time. Yes, that's the way it ended up. But you know, hey, look, I'm giving you this massive conflict that it's not even your turn. You know,
right? And your turn's next. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Lloyd?
I was just thinking about the war front against the dwarves, and you have like all these normal soldiers who are there day to day, like digging trenches, holding the line, trying to fight against dwarves with cannons, and then they come to a point where they can't move any further, and then they bring in the big boys, the scary boys, and then all the soldiers have to turn around and not look as they like file past, because they're like too sacred, but actually they're too horrifying to look at. And then they like run past, and there's like, when the soldiers move through again, there's just like dwarves that have been like ripped in half, and like the damage is so horrifying that they're like, oh, wow.
So you know? I think one of the awesome things mechanically, so these armored wagons roll up, right? And with these beasted horses that have also been force fed this Mana Kernel, so that they can move these gigantic wagons. And the normal people, you know, Lloyd hit on, they lower their eyes, they're leaving. Like, this is no longer a place for them. This is the one church. These are their people coming out here to save us for all of time. And a bunch of alchemical smoke is thrown out, so the battlefield is covered in smoke. So all you see are these massive shadows moving through it, because they all have dark vision or tremor sense or something. They can fight in this. And they just are shredding these dwarves. But I also have this idea that not all of these guys who go to this extreme are super dedicated. You have murderers and criminals that are being given a chance, like, hey, you don't want to be hung? cool. Drink this, eat this,
Mhm.
go fight. If you win, you continue to live today.
Yep.
That's a lot better than being hung this afternoon. So
Yeah, but I love the idea that the pageantry that surrounds these groups of people is this elite, holy unit
Yes.
that's rolling in.
They're saints or
It's-
something, you know?
Yeah, exactly. They're the angels of destruction. They're
Yeah.
they're literally Michael and Gabriel coming back, with their
Yeah.
lances and sabers and things, and it's and not the apocalypse. What's the word?
Revelations.
Yes,
right?
the revelations.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the other beautiful thing I think that comes out of it, so like the Valkyrie, right, where they would normally take the spirits of warriors. So instead, you have the Carrion sisters. They come out afterwards. They clean up the bits and mess of these monsters that were able to be destroyed by the dwarves, and they hide it from the common people. They
Mm,
take that back into the church, and it's destroyed there. But certain
right.
parts of it, like the really well muscled arm that isn't monstrous, it just looks like that Captain America arm, is brought back and enshrined for a time of look what they got lifted to, and this was all that was left of them, those damn dirty dwarves.
Right. That's great. Yeah. Because I do think if you have normal soldiers walking in and seeing that level of gore, they would be like, what? Is that a saint? What? But I think then you have these people come in and sort of like sweep the area and make it presentable. So the troops can go in and go, wow, they really got those dwarves, huh? Look at that. They really got them. And like the dwarves are like, positioned nicely so that they look like maybe even like holding their weapons and like, they fought fairly and like justly. And yeah. Yeah, it's grim, huh? It's not a nice world to live in. I like it.
Love it.
Yeah. So Cole asked, do the Karen sisters also do healing? I think so. I think you might have a few of them that for the really elite units of these berserkers, I think the church might spend a few charges of healing from whatever they have of these relics to keep them going in a battle. Because the king really wants this, right? So yeah, they do, but they're also not totally insane because they're not beefed up, hopped up on drugs. Like they're gonna bolt when the fecal matter hits a rotary device because they can't be out there fist fighting alongside these hulks. And the dwarves have cannons that will blow them up. So like they run out there and they try and patch up what they can, but most of their job is to simply clean up the bodies of these monsters as they're felled so that no one ever knows they existed, right? Like it's almost like when the smoke clears, all these dwarves are sort of laid out from having lost the fight, but there's no evidence of these holy warriors because they were all taken up by the gods.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I like that. There's no earthly evidence of them.
Right. Yeah, they ascended.
Right. They clean up the bits where they pour alchemical acid on them, just like dissolve them into the ground and just go on about their lives.
That's wicked. Yeah.
I mean, they're just a huge cover up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are rounding about an hour 45. So do we want to get Lloyd's signature element and all that kind of stuff, that we can wrap it up?
Yeah.
Steve, you want to lay that out?
All right. So every contributor so far, at the end of it, gets to give us one thing that is your idea, gets plugged into the world, and it can never be taken out. Someone else may build off of it. Like the Hearth Wardens was actually Baron Control's idea, and it has been expounded upon indefinitely at this point. But it's something that you want to stamp the world with. It is your creation that will exist inside of Sunderhearth.
Of what we talked about today, I
Anything.
think it's, oh man, we've got two really sick things here. I think it's the wizard reincarnating in bodies.
Okay.
System.
So what do you want to add to it that we didn't necessarily discuss that becomes your button on it?
I want them to be good.
Okay.
Like just, and I don't know. I think there's a word for it in the Old Forgotten Realms of like Baelnorn, which is like a good lich. Like the idea that like they're doing this awful thing, because I think it would be easy if you're running the game to show this as an evil thing, and it kind of is in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like a higher responsibility, and they are goodly as an order.
Okay.
I think that to me would make it a little bit more interesting, because it's really easy to be like, and they're evil wizards and they do all this weird shit, but actually like keeping these people in the archive is a sacred duty that they have to do, and all that knowledge of magic has to be kept, and that's like a deep responsibility. Nobody wants to transfer and lose themselves, but I think like, so maybe frame it more like that's a sacred sacrifice and like a goodly thing, I think.
Okay. The one thing I would like to ask of you in the coming weeks between now and December is if you can come up with a name for this order of the wizards. Just shoot it up into the text, and we'll add it in.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cole says it's Baelnorn.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's from Mithranor. Is that what it's called? It used to be like a Forgotten Realm setting, I think. Maybe. Like a lost elven city, and there were good elven liches there, I think.
Yeah, I definitely do remember coming across their stat block in one of the older editions for like how to roll one up. So I definitely know that it's a thing, but my like canon knowledge of the established settings is very, very, very poor.
Mine is fragmented from when I was a kid and I would look at monster books. Like before I ever played D&D, I would like look through the monster manuals and be like, "Ooh, cool!" And I absorbed so much of it that way. Most of my knowledge of like Forgotten Realms is through monster manuals.
I just googled it. I didn't realize how deep it went. Man, you had Watch Norns, Lore Norns, Guard Norns, Ward Norns, Bale Norns.
A whole lot of shit. Yep.
Jeez.
Yeah, they.
Food of Radiance. Yes.
Yeah, they were part of the ones who put Mistle in charge of Mithranor, which is nuts. All right, well, that's enough about that setting. That.
Man, I can't wait to. I say this every time we have one of these episodes, but like, my mind is just bursting. It's overflowing with ideas for games to run in Sunderhearth, and every time that we do one of these, that it just gets fuller and fuller and fuller. So yeah, I'm glad that the end is coming because of that reason. I'll actually
it's getting super full, right? Yeah,
right. Yeah. So
I think like there's 2 campaign ideas from this session alone that I have about like from the 2 big things, which is the wizards and the saints or whatever they are,
Yeah, we're gonna come up with a name for them.
Yeah.
The only name that I really like the idea of the Carrion sisters being the ones that go out and clean up the battlefield. Like that's a pretty like out there in like their black like feathered cloaks. Like it's pretty awesome. And then the other thing that we'll tap you for coming up is after the first of the year, we're gonna try and run some couple game sessions for each of the creators. So we'll basically put out a huge Google Calendar and be like, "Yo, put in the times that you guys can play and the times that people can run," and then we'll match people up and we'll do some sessions inside of Sunderhearth.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely want to do like a scary World War I one shot where you're the normal troops and then the weird dudes arrive and you got to be like, "Oh God, don't look."
Oh man, that's great.
It's awesome. Okay, cool.
And then
yeah. Is there anything else we need?
So the last thing is we did have a lot of feedback into the comments. So I don't know if we mentioned it last time because we're kind of used to the same people that tune in, but we got some new people the last couple of sessions of this. So if you guys contribute in the comments, and it is something that makes its way into the final papers, we'll tap you and figure out how you want to be accredited for it. Not accredited, just credited. I'm not going to accreditate you. That's not beyond me. But how you want to be credited for it. And so, understand that you are contributing and it's very, very helpful. What's next week? The week after this week and not another session of this because my head will explode.
Yeah, we won't have another one of these until November. At some point. Yeah. And that one is going to be major characters and places, I think.
I know it's major players, yeah. And that's M, right?
Yes, I just confirmed with M today
And
that M is going
He's
to
gone.
be our guest.
Right. Well, he's sort of there. Are you there?
Uh-oh.
There we
Am I
go.
breaking up? I just got a notification saying my internet connection is unstable. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, he's delayed.
That's the really significant delay.
Oh, no.
All right, now you're back. You're back in
back.
real time.
Okay, am I?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got a,
But that-
got
yeah.
a notice that was like, your connection's unstable. I'm like, what? Okay.
That's all right.
Anyways, yeah, I just confirmed with them today that M will be the next guest, and we're going to talk about that, so I'm excited.
Perfect.
Cool. Well, we should probably duck out of here before my internet completely combusts. So, once again, Lloyd, thank you so much for agreeing to come on and bringing the
Thank you.
fantastic ideas.
Super
that,
fun.
Super
I don't
awesome,
know,
man. Thank
rattle
you.
around in your skull. Cool. Thank you, everybody who has tuned in. It's been an honor, as always, to host this here on the channel. So, yeah, tune in next time for the next two of them. 2 left, and then this project will be, yeah, at an end.
Yeah, then it'll be at the point where we got to figure out what the next step is.
Then the logistics have to kick in. But,
Right.
yeah. So, until next time, may your dice roll high, and your snacks always be within reach.